All right, welcome back. So the Foundation for Human Rights says the 21st of March 1960 will always be remembered as a key moment in the struggle against apartheid. It's a day when thousands of ordinary South Africans rose in unison against unfair discrimination and black segregation. The police violence on that day shocked the world and highlighted the brutality and oppressive nature of apartheid policies. The transitioning to democracy in 1994 brought hope as people looked forward to enjoying their hard-fought rights. Now, almost 30 years later, we look at how much has changed for the previously disadvantaged in South Africa. And to discuss this with us, we've got Hanif Vally, who is the Executive Director at the Foundation for Human Rights. Hanif, great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, I mean, let's just put it out there and ask right at the top, how much or how has South Africa changed since the 1994 transition?
Well, let's not underestimate the nature of the change. For those of us who have lived through apartheid and still living through the after effects of apartheid, you're talking about a massive sea change. You're talking about a massive attitude change. We're talking about a situation where people were treated as subhumans, where millions of people were locked up because they didn't have a piece of paper, where you couldn't use many parts of our country which were reserved only for white people. So there's been a massive, massive change. So let's not underestimate that. I hate it when people say things were better under apartheid. They were not. They were an insult to the majority of people, especially the indigenous people of this country, and they were treated like subhumans.
I mean, as you say, sorry to interrupt you, but there is much to celebrate. There really is, and as much as nothing can be as common, systematic, and legitimized as what the apartheid government did, there also is an eerie commonality in some of the post-94 events that we have witnessed. I mean, making one question if the current government is truly committed to human rights, given the fact that there often is no form of sanction taken against perpetrators.
Well, this is my concern, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, at its very core, human rights is subjecting power to law. And our Constitution is very clear. You know, in order for people to take themselves out of the poverty that they were plunged into by apartheid and colonialism, there has to be respect for fundamental human rights. And fundamental human rights also includes socio-economic rights. Right to food, right to water, right to shelter, right to health. And in this area, we've been very, very sadly lacking. By and large, civil and political rights have been respected. But in terms of socio-economic rights, there's a distinct lack of respect. And this is what keeps people in poverty. You know, there's what's called the capability thesis, that if you give people the right to food, water, shelter, etc., they will take themselves out of poverty. We've had many other countries, including Scandinavian countries, who were able to take themselves out of poverty, or Malaysia, etc. But we failed to do so in our country, and that's because of the lack of delivery on these issues.
Yeah. Is it not disappointing, to say the least, that some human rights atrocities continue to happen in this democratic dispensation, whether we're talking to police brutality, people dying at the hands of police, and we were looking at just something that happened in terms of a student protest. I mean, the killing of civilians, life Esedimeni, the Marikana tragedy. These are large-scale tragedies and human rights abuses.
Massive, massive. Again, you know, it's not a fair comparison. You talk about an apartheid government that had death squads that went around surreptitiously murdering people. But that does not excuse some of the behavior that's taking place. I mean, by now we should have got public order policing right, and it's not happening. How did Marikana happen, and why should it have happened? And all these issues are extremely important and very relevant. The fact that we've got accountability makes a big difference. But there's massive need for improvement, and also the issue of corruption. It is very shocking and it's very sad that people who lived through what apartheid had put us through are still willing to steal from poor people.
Yeah. One could argue that they were and are different reasons, but if we look 45 years after the 1976 student uprising and police killing, students are still marching for education in 2021. I mean, it's a very, very, it's a heartbreaking situation when you do that comparison. What has gone wrong?
Well, we talk about a number of different levels. Firstly, again, the scale of the murder of students in 76 is very different from the incidents that take place recently, but even these are totally unacceptable. And we keep talking about public order policing. It's not just the students, but it's what happened in the Free State before, etc. And we have an incident, or we have Marikana, we have a big uproar, and then it all dies down again. There has to be structural, systematic change or training of the police, how to conduct public order policing, etc. So there is that fundamental systematic change that has not taken place. That's on the one level. On the other level is this, the estimates have been something like 15 billion rands was looted, and I think that's an underestimation. How can you steal so much from a country? We talk about billions quite glibly, but if you consider it, if you convert numbers into seconds, 1 million is 11 days, 1 billion is 31 years. So you're talking about 15 billion taken away, which could have improved the lives of millions of people in the country. And what is even more horrifying is the human rights, the South African Statistics Department have been saying that the level of education has in fact been dropping. Now, close to 30 years after democracy, why is this happening? Why is the level of education dropping? And how can you have poor people excluded from education because they do not have money? This is part of the problem. Apartheid impoverished people. They did not allow people to develop capital, acquire a profession, work in jobs which paid a fair salary. And as a result, there's a whole generation of impoverished people. And also, impoverishment has got a gender bias in this country, especially women. Yeah. And a lot of them are single parents. How is it possible that people who do not have money are not going to be allowed to have education? Yeah. This is just unacceptable, especially because various governments that have been in power in this country have been saying the opposite. They say they're committed to it, and our Constitution calls upon them to do something positive about it. Indeed. The Constitution is not silent on social and economic rights. In addition to the positive things in our Constitution, equality for people of different sexual orientation, we also have one of the few constitutions in the world which has socioeconomic rights, food, water, shelter, enforceable under certain conditions in a practical way. So why has the government allowed this to continue? This is just totally unacceptable.
Hanif, just one final question. We're about to enter into news time. I mean, South Africa has for years been overpowered by a diabolical culture of corruption. It's almost treasonous if you look at how it has set back service delivery. Everybody talking about it, but is persistently and aggressively invading the country, and no one is ever held accountable, despite the formal and informal dialogues on corruption. It appears that we're simply numb to it. When we look at holding leaders accountable, this is one of the biggest problems, I imagine, that people, that we have here in South Africa, is accountability and the lack thereof.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. You have a situation where, and I'm glad you used the word treasonous. They should be charged with treason. There is no two ways about this. And this is just not only the ruling party. You see across the board, you see opposition parties that loot banks where poor people have got their money, that encourage municipalities to take money away from service delivery and put it in the banks so they can steal it. Even although they mouth that they're acting for the poor. And the issue is impunity, accountability, as you've said it. It has been found, and from the days of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we've also seen that if people are not held accountable, they will repeat their crimes. So impunity is the issue. If they're not held accountable as a matter of urgency, then the theft and the stealing will go on. let's also just get another thing clear. We do not have to wait for a criminal trial. Look, we've had our whole prosecutorial services, which had been subverted under previous governments, and lackeys have been put in that were there to protect people who were stealing. People who were honest civil servants and tried to expose this were also got rid of. They were fired. Some of them were even falsely accused of very disciplinary offenses. So that impunity has gone deep into our society, and we need to address it. But we don't have to wait for a finding of a criminal finding.
Yeah.
We can, in the interim, on a balance of probability, try and weed some of these people out, even from Parliament. If you have been found stealing from poor people outside Parliament, you should not be in Parliament.
Indeed.
And I think we need to revise our whole thinking on the issue of corruption, on the issue of how to address corruption, and most important, how to address the issue of impunity.
All right.
You know, we also said during the Truth Commission there should be no lustration, that people who've been found guilty of offences should not be prevented from holding public office. I think that attitude has to change.
All right, Hanif, we have to leave it there.
Thank you very much.
We have to, and I thank you so much for your time and talking to us here on the program. Hanif Vally is talking to us about the current human rights 27 years after democracy in 1995. And of course, Hanif is the Executive Director at the Foundation for Human Rights. Right, just after 7 o'clock, let's get on.